Welcome to Founders Future, a podcast by Closers.io where we dive into the journeys of innovative entrepreneurs and explore the road ahead for them and their companies. I'm your host, Jet Boardman, and in each episode, we uncover the stories behind successful startups, the challenges faced along the way, and the strategies driving their future expansion. Today, we're excited to have John Bates, the founder of Executive Speaking Success, joining us. John's coached thousands of leaders from NASA astronauts to Google execs to the master the art of communication, and he's one of the world's top TED format speaker coaches. He'll be sharing his founding story and giving us a glimpse into how he's scaling his mission to make leadership communication as mighty as the ideas behind it. So let's jump right in. John, welcome to Founders Future.
Thank you. Glad to be here, Jet.
Really excited to have you on today. So let's just go and take it straight back to the beginning. What sparked the idea for you to start Executive Speaking Success?
Okay, so I want to be really clear about this because I think people don't tell the truth about their entrepreneurial journeys that often. I had nothing else that I could find that I thought I could do because I'd always been an entrepreneur. I'd always been working for way too many stock options that never got liquid and not enough money. And when my job that was like that was paying me too little money, a bunch of stock options, that job dried up. And all of a sudden I was probably 50 grand in debt. I had just gotten married. I loved my wife and I had no idea how I was going to pay rent. And so I thought, I haven't ever specialized in anything because I've been an entrepreneur. So like if the bottles needed washing, I would wash them. If somebody needed to take over customer service, I did it, but I never specialized in anything. And then it dawned on me that I was a public speaker. I'd always been the evangelist for my companies and, I could do public speaking coaching. And I talked to some friends that were advisors who would be the kinds of people that would hire me at their companies and things. And they all said, oh, don't be a speaker coach. Like they're a dime a dozen. Like, that's horrible, John. Don't do that. So I cried for another month and then I finally just couldn't figure out anything else to do. So I did it. And the first year I went further in debt. The second year I broke even. The third year I made more than I ever made in my whole life ever before. And then I doubled that plus, and then I tripled that plus. And, that's kind of been the story. So it was not a really straightforward path. And it involved a whole bunch of crying so hard boogers came out. And, I'm just really glad I had my wife there to encourage me and believe in me when I didn't believe in myself. And I had some really great early on clients who told me that I was, much more than a speaker coach, and they introduced me to their networks and stuff. But that's how this happened. I just failed at everything else I did till I finally found this and loved it enough to do it for a little while.
I love that, man. Some people might argue with you that you didn't fail enough. You just weren't on the right path, right? There's some thought leaders that'll tell you that. So
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't failure. It was learning. Look, there's no way I could sit with these incredibly high level people and talk to them about the things that we talk about in the vulnerable things that we talk about if I hadn't failed so hard, right? I raised several $100 million with my various teams in Silicon Valley and other places. And I never had a really successful exit. So like I have massive amounts of failure, but boy, did it teach me a lot. And now all that learning plays heavily into the coaching that I do,
That's incredible. Well, let's kind of go through the journey. I mean, you've gone from being a UCLA grad to coaching NASA and Google leaders. How did your background shape your approach to building this business?
I think that one of the things that stood out for me was that I saw my dad when I was growing up just get utterly screwed by a corporate job. And I was like, oh, it's not actually security. You know what I mean? You're just working for someone else and they could let you go at any time. They can do anything they want. And so I always wanted to be an entrepreneur. And I was at UCLA and I was working in 1987. I was at the first ever Macintosh computer lab, any place on earth that was connected to the internet. And so I had this liminal moment when like the light bulbs went on that the internet was going to be huge. And I feel like I was John the Baptist for the internet for a long time. Nobody wanted to hear about it. They all thought I was boring. But then when it really hit, everybody knew that I had been talking about it for years. And I got sucked into the whole .com world and got to play a leading role in a lot of that stuff. I was no Jeff Bezos or anything, but I did some, I was a part of some big things and really set the tone for a number of years. So, I was just lucky to be in that spot.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I mean, I love your honesty in this as well, because I think you're right. A lot of entrepreneurs aren't quite honest about how they started. So
Yeah,
I,
right.
I like the raw approach, man. I think the listeners will love that as well. So, I mean, your work focuses heavily on like TED style speaking, right? Storytelling,
Yes.
and it's rooted in neuroscience.
Yeah.
How did you evolve your offer from where you started in this niche, and what surprised you about who your ideal clients turned out to be?
So, this all started when I had been at TED, had had a realization that, oh my God, because I always was the soft skills guy. And the people that I worked with, even though I was raising the money, the hard skills people would say, oh, John, he does the fluffy stuff, right? So I just didn't get the value of my side of the equation till I went to TED. And then I was like, oh, wow, like that kind of public speaking is really powerful. And even though I've always thought I was really, really good and I've been the best speaker at those tech conferences, I'm nowhere near as good as I could be, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I came back from that experience, got really involved in the TED and TEDx world. And at one of the first ever TEDx events, we had this guy who had all the hard skills in the world, had the most exciting topic, was the guy I was waiting for all day. And when he got up in the afternoon to speak and started talking, everybody in the audience just checked out because he was so nervous and awkward. We all thought we were going to throw up for him. And I remember sitting there being super sad at first. Then I got kind of mad because I thought about what that must have cost my companies to have people like him in the company who were brilliant but couldn't communicate. And then the evil part of me popped out and I was like, hard skills guy is blowing it, calls what I do fluffy, neener, neener. And as I was doing that, my buddy came over and he said, dude, we got to do something to help people like this. And I was like, like mind
Right.
blown. And I went home that night and I started working on what I now, like you said, get to do all over the world. I pinch myself, dude. I got to train the astronauts. Like I've gotten calls from space, like I never thought that would happen. But what I did something differently because of that moment that was purely by accident. Again, like I'm not some kind of genius. This was just like, I realized that if I wanted to really connect with that guy, that super hard skills guy who blew it, I would need to base everything I could in human evolutionary biology and human neurophysiology so I could show people not only what works when it comes to communicating with and influencing and reaching human beings, but also why it works based in science. And there were a number of things that I didn't think about. First thing was when you base it in science, it works, right? And that's cool, right? And
Mhm.
that turns out. And I made it principles based. And so when people get the principles that all of this communication is based on, not only do they know why they're doing what they're doing, but that makes them more creative in what they're doing. And it also makes them vastly more confident because they know what to do and why. Right. And I just didn't think of any of that stuff. But looking back in hindsight, it becomes really obvious that that's why this all turned out to be so successful, is because that's what I did. And it was just purely because I wanted to reach that guy. But it turns out that everybody wants to know not only what works, but why.
Mhm. Well, it's interesting you talk about that. I mean, I think one of my favorite TED Talks ever is Simon Sinek, Start With Why,
To
right?
start with why. And that was a huge influence on me, right?
Incredible. Yeah. And it's
That
interesting to hear you take it because he talks about a lot more in a business standpoint, right? But you came at it from a human connection. Why do I want to connect and why does this work?
Dude, and it's all about the brain stem, the midbrain, and then the neocortex, right? But you got to
Yeah.
start with the brain stem and the midbrain. Otherwise, if you don't have an emotional connection, all the logic in the world just bounces off
Right.
because that new brain is wrapped around the outside of that old brain. And that's what you have to make an emotional connection with to actually get the signal to the spinal column to sign the check.
Yeah, incredible. I love that. So we're gonna kind of jump into your journey a little bit here. I mean, every founder has a dark moment, if you will, where
No.
giving up feels like an option. I'm
Yeah.
sure you've hit one of those. When did that happen for you, and what kept you pushing forward?
Well, I've had several of those, but the really the first big one in this business was basically right when I started it. I I I had been kind of doing it on the side, and then I finally just committed fully. And I remember sitting there right after Sharon and I had gotten married. She was out somewhere, and it just hit me like what an incredibly horrible financial position I was in. And I didn't know how I was going to, I didn't know what to do because I was not closing deals. Nobody knew about me. I'd done a few things, but right. And I remember sitting there. This was one of those crying so hard the boogers were coming out
Hmm.
moment. And all of a sudden, I got a text from my wife, and she said, "Honey, I love you and I believe in you." And dude, that's not something she does very often. Like, it's not like she sends me these words of affirmation like 24/7 or something. Like, that was really maybe the first time she'd ever done anything like that. And she must have picked up subconsciously that I was down or something, but who knows? And then I just cried harder, and it was 2012, so it was the early days of LinkedIn. And after I blew my nose a few more times, I went on LinkedIn and I just freaking sent a message to everybody I knew, telling them what I had started, this new company that I was, executive speaking success.
Hmm.
And by the end of the day, I'd gotten an email from a woman who was working with Motorola who wanted to bring me on. And I called my friend who used to work with Steve Jobs at Apple. And he and I closed that deal together. The reason I closed it because he was willing to come in with me. And boom, like something happened. And it was off to the races. And it was, like I said, the first year I still went further in debt,
Hmm.
but something shifted, you know. And I think my biggest lesson about everything in life is even the moments when I feel like just the world's biggest loser and I can't believe I just failed again, I go back the next day.
That's huge. That's
Just keep coming back, you know?
keep coming back. I love that. Well, there is a misconception that with speakers and founders, but that it says the misconception is that a lot of great speakers are born not made.
Oh, dude,
One,
that's such a freaking lie. That is a total lie. You want me to put
so
the lie to that? You want me to tell you a
that's
secret?
the question. What's one myth about leadership communication you want to debunk?
Oh, dude, that there's any such thing as a natural born leader or a natural born communicator. I call bullshit on that, right? Excuse me if I'm not supposed to
Oh,
say
you're
that.
good. You can
Um,
free reign on this one.
okay, all right. Well, I don't usually say words like that, but that is complete bullshit. So here's the secret. Steve Jobs, who we called the natural communicator, right? We call him the natural communicator. Okay, here's the real story. After they spent weeks, maybe even longer, writing the speech and getting the speech perfect, he would practice it for an hour for every minute he was going to be on stage. So that 45-minute speech he would give, he would practice it on stage for 45 hours. Do you know
Jeez.
you would be pretty good too if you did
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
Okay, that's not called natural. That's called hard work.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and do you think he didn't have good coaches? Okay, good luck, Tiger Woods, with no coaches, right?
Right.
And Tiger Woods had multiple coaches. None of them could beat him at golf, or they would have. But because he was coachable, they had him beat what seemed like everybody for what seemed like forever, right?
Hmm.
So practice and being coachable. That's how you get to be a natural anything.
That's huge. That's huge. And you can look at any successful person in the world and
Any,
find a coach.
any,
I mean, we're
any.
talking Michael Jordan, we talk, Messi, we talk any of these superstars, every single
Yep.
one is a coach.
Yep.
I
None
love
of them did that on their own or were born that way.
And you
No.
would say that applies to both leadership and to speaking.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, great. We're going to come back to some of that coaching here in a little bit. But kind
Okay.
of jumping into your business, right? So walk us through how executive speaking success really generates revenue for you. Is it one-on-one? Are you doing workshops, or how do you make money in your business?
So I have three buckets really. And then I have a fourth that I just started with a partner. So the one of the big ones is just one-on-one coaching with people who need to give the talk of their lives, right? Or people who are speakers that want to get into the field, or they've got a TEDx coming up. In fact, right now I'm working with a guy who makes $25,000 a speech, and he came to me and said, "John, I want to make 50. Let's tighten my thing up. Help me take the next level." Okay, great. I also work with a lot of people who are scared to even get on stage. So it doesn't matter where people are in the process. All that matters is that they understand the upside of being really, really good enough to afford me, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so anybody that's got to give the speech of their lives or wants to become just a much better leader and communicator, I've got a bunch of one-on-one programs. And then the next bucket is group training. So, large and small group training. A lot of times I'll go places like NASA, and we'll just get all 2,000 people in flight operations in a room, and I'll do a training for them in the morning, and then I'll take the much smaller leadership team for the afternoon and maybe a second day, and I'll work with them much more personally, and we'll do more exercises and all that kind of stuff. So that's the second bucket. And then the third bucket is pitch coaching for companies that are out, either they want help pitching their product for VC, or like I worked a lot with Accenture with a lot of their teams that would go out and pitch these multi-million-dollar contracts. So
Mhm.
for me, all that stuff is the same. Fundamentally, it comes down to understanding the principles of human neurobiology that will make you a successful communicator, but in
Mhm.
those are the three different buckets, but it's kind of the same stuff in my mind. And then recently, I bumped into a guy named Mark Albert, who is a 25-year veteran of CBS News as a news reporter. And for a long time, he ran the investigative journalism department for Hearst and all that stuff. So he really, really, really knows media. And we realized that for thought leaders or for high level executives who want to establish their that they're an expert in their field, or for thought leaders or influencers, there's this really great feedback loop of being quoted in the press as an expert and then getting speaking gigs. And as you get speaking gigs like at TEDx or other places, that feeds back into more media wanting to reach out to you to get your thoughts and things that they can quote you in the press. And so the more that you do both of those things, the faster everything rises. And we were like, wow, you got chocolate in my peanut butter. And we created a program we call Media Mastery Experts to help people who are experts in their field leverage that into all kinds of visibility for their company, and raise their status and their visibility as an expert.
Great. So yeah, these four different buckets, right? That's
So
that's where
four buckets. Yeah, that's
where
right.
you put people in. Okay, cool. And how do you determine which one you're going to do with someone? Is it just based off what they're preparing for, or how do you determine you're a good fit for a group, you're a good fit for a one-on-one?
Well, that, I mean, it's one of those things, right? That I think we can all learn better, and that I'm still learning to get better at. But when I have a conversation with someone, like, my job is not to talk as much as to listen,
Mhm.
and really, like, all I want to do is make a difference. That's really all I want to do. So the more I listen to somebody and really ask them the right questions about where they are, what they want to do, what they see the value would be in it, how much it matters to them versus something else, the more that I can understand that, the better I can direct them to things. And so, and if it sounds like maybe one or two things would work for them, I can say, well, we've got this and we've got this. What do you think is more up your alley?
Mm, okay. So it is really a collaborative type conversation with you. It's not, hey, this is what I'm going to do for you. It's this is what I think makes sense. How do you feel?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, like, yeah, I want to, I almost died after I lost my .com company. And long story short, just out of the shame and the embarrassment and the lack of sleep and the stress, I had an autoimmune disease almost kill me. And in the hospital, I had this moment where I looked back on my life because, like, I really was worried I was going to die. And I realized that on a certain level, it had been really small and selfish. And I'd been nice to people and I was kind and I wanted to take people with me, but it was all about I'm going to succeed. And I said to the universe in the hospital there, you know, I'm embarrassed of this and I don't want this to be my legacy. Like, if you please let me walk out of here, I promise my number one goal will be to make a difference. And the universe let me walk out, and I was not okay for a while, but I got to come back, and I have kept my deathbed promise. So, really, for me, like, there's that promise is looms large in my mind, and I just want to make a difference for people. So, whatever they're up to, I try and slot myself into the place where I can see that I'll make the biggest difference. And sometimes that's harder than others because people don't know what I know already. Like, I've been doing this
Mhm.
for 15 years and I see the results and I know what's going to happen, but they don't always see that. But fundamentally, that's always my driving force is how can I make the biggest difference for this person? Because that's my promise to something much bigger than me or them.
Right, right. And I mean, you've worked with some incredible clients like NASA and Google you've mentioned before.
Yep.
How do you find clients like that?
Again, I'm maybe not as talented as people think. Um, I I was at I was doing a live event. So there's a good lesson in this. I was doing a live event for Johnson and Johnson Innovations J Labs, which was run at the time by a woman named Melinda Richter, who was a huge fan of mine and who had done me all kinds of favors. So I did them a favor. They paid me like my very basic expenses, and I did this basically free event for them. And I was in Houston doing that event and there were some people from NASA who came in, and they, these two women from NASA were sitting in the audience. And when I was doing an event about storytelling, and they came up to me afterwards and they said, John, we have a whole bunch of people you need to work with at NASA because if we can't make what we do interesting, we don't deserve to do it. Will you help us? And I was like, yes, so like I just
Yeah.
again, I think it's one of those things of just show up, just go get out there, just go make a difference. And, you know, I didn't make much money on that event, but ultimately that event was one of the most valuable things to me
Right,
ever because
right,
that led to me ultimately training all the active astronauts.
right, right. And it sounds like I mean, what you're talking about is just being bought in on your mission. Your mission is impact, and you went for impact. And as a byproduct of you following your mission and your goals and
Yes,
values, you were paid back financially,
that's
plus
right.
with more opportunity for impact.
Yeah.
I
Yep.
love it. I love
Yep.
it. Well, as we're talking about, your business now, what do you feel like your biggest bottleneck is to growth? Is it finding people to work with? Is it having enough time to work with people? What is it that you feel like you struggle with the most?
Right now, like there will be a ton of bottlenecks after I solve this one, but something that I've been working on over the last year or so is just that top of funnel thing, right?
Hmm.
Finding enough of the right qualified buyers that can afford me because I'm certainly not inexpensive. I'm not the most expensive, but I'm certainly not the least. And
Hmm.
once I solve that problem, I'm going to very quickly need to solve the problem of, I'm working on my systems. I'm hardening my systems for growth right now, but
Uh-huh.
I'm going to need to figure out how to train people in what I do so that I can scale that. And that has never been really important to me because my son's 8 and I just didn't feel like doing that while he was little and he wasn't in school and I could spend all this time with him. Now that he's starting to do more of his own stuff, my time's freeing up a little bit and I really want to go to the next level of scale and impact. So right now, the problem is the top of funnel.
The top of funnel.
Yeah. And I mean, and I'm working on hardening the systems, like I said, but I'm sure that's going to be the very next problem is just,
Right.
oh my gosh, how do I, like, my systems are falling apart. Like, there's not enough time for me to keep up with this. I need to hire somebody to do this,
Right.
hire somebody to do that. So I'm prepping for that.
Right.
Nice problem to have, I'd say.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, here's maybe a loaded question for you, but as you scale, do you ever see a version of the future of this business where you're not doing the fulfillment as much as you've got someone trained to do it? Or do you think you would pass off every other responsibility first to leave yourself fulfillment as the number one thing you do?
I think that it would be, I mean, can I choose both?
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
I love doing this, right? And I would love to get myself out of any other aspect of my business, like not have to deal with any of that stuff, have people that love that doing that. And part of what I would want to do with all that time is be training people to deliver this so that we could scale it globally.
Hmm. Okay, so it'd be both. It's number one, that's probably gonna be the last thing you let go of, but you still want to bring someone in to let them come and help you do it so you can really grow.
Yeah, and I think a lot of your listeners will resonate with this, and maybe I'll be saying something they've known but haven't articulated yet. Dude, I was given such a freaking gift. I like this whole thing fell in my lap. Like I
Mhm.
decided to do this because of that moment at TEDx. And it's not like I'm some genius who hatched this up. You know what I mean? I I I created it having no idea how powerful it would turn out to be. And I've spent the last 15 years perfecting it. And I don't want to die with my music inside me. Like I want this to get out there because I know the difference that it makes.
Right.
And I will only ever be able to reach an infinitesimally small amount of people with this, but everyone on earth who has anything going on at all that involves other human beings needs this. So I feel like it's selfish of me not to make this
Right.
available in a more scalable way, right?
Right.
And I've got a
Right.
fabulous online course. I haven't figured out how to sell that at scale. That's one option. I think it would be really easy for me now, having done this 15 years, to train other people in it. I could shortcut their learning tremendously.
Hmm.
Um, I want to train people internal to companies like General Electric and Johnson and Johnson, who are their communications like masters, who
Hmm.
don't focus on what I do, but if they had it in their back pocket, it would be so helpful. So I see all kinds of ways that this could scale. And so that's kind of the next couple of years is figuring all that out and getting it out there.
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, it's like the Vincent Van Gogh, right? You don't want to have your work become popular when you're not here to see it, right?
Yeah,
You're
right.
talking about impact. Impact, I mean, it's still impact, but you want to see the
Yeah.
impact actually take some play.
Well, exactly. And my stuff doesn't exist like paintings. So, like,
Right.
if I die and it's not already popular, it's unlikely that it will become
Right.
popular.
Right. No, I totally understand that. So let's kind of dive into this question here. If you could wave a magic wand, right, fix one thing in your business to skyrocket your growth, what would it be and why?
I mean, I think it would be that top of the funnel.
Just getting more people that you know you want to work with talking to you.
Yeah, getting more people that could actually, like, that actually figuring out a way to get a big number of people who already come in knowing the value of what we do. And it's just maybe they're comparing us against a couple other people or something,
Hmm.
but people that, finding a way to reach people who could afford and who understand the value of what we do and have a big enough business and footprint and stuff that that cost is super leverageable across all of that.
Right. Okay. Well, maybe taking a different approach to this. If money and time were no object, what would you implement tomorrow to take your business to the next level? Meaning money, as in you don't have to put money in, and also money coming out doesn't exist.
Um, Gosh, that's a really good question. I mean, I think that it would be, I think that I would maybe have more of a sales team that really knew what they were doing and free up a bunch more of my time so I didn't have to take as many of those initial calls. And
Mm-hmm.
I had a lot more time to be delivering things and creating new things and, all that. It would, another thing that would be really cool would be to have somebody whose love was implementing and strategizing the next levels and things, and who'd come to me and say, okay, John, you know, this is working really well. Now the next thing we need is this. Can you go create it? And I'd be like, yeah. And then they could go
Right.
implement it and sell it and whatever. Right.
Right. Okay.
So I think in the EOS, it would be maybe an implementer.
I
Right.
was gonna say visionary versus implementer. You're the visionary. You need that implementer in play.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Cool. Well, kind of switching gears a little bit again here. I mean, leadership communication is evolving fast, especially with remote work and AI. All these things coming into play.
Yeah.
How do you see your industry shifting, and how are you kind of positioning yourself to lead that charge?
It's a really good question. And I, I think that for me, my look, maybe this is showing how much I need to think about it more. But um, for me, it seems to me that the aspects of that are relevant most to my business are things like how search is changing and where people are getting their information and all that kind of top of funnel stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, I kind of go the other direction with this, which is that we've been biologically human for about 3 to 500,000 years, and we don't shift and change nearly as fast as technology. So ultimately, as long as human beings are interacting with each other, which, like a lot of us aren't, a lot of people are interacting with AI and freaking chat. But
Right.
as long as there are these human to human interactions, the principles of my training are going to be super relevant. And as people interact less, and as they get less facile with that and they get less good at that, these principles are only going to be more important because we are fundamentally biologically human. And that is, communicating with human beings is not logical. You may
Right.
have noticed it's not logical, it's biological. And
Right.
that biology is, compared to technology, that biology is fixed.
Yeah.
It is not changing quickly. So I think that for my lifetime in the next couple, there will always be room for that one-to-one human interaction.
Right.
Um, and you know, maybe there's an AI John coach that's useful or something like that. But I just think people really like to be together in person.
Yeah.
And those fundamental biological principles of human communication are never going to, like, they're not going to change in our lifetimes.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up as well, right? You talk about, even like the next generation. So many people, iPad kids or whatever you want to call it, right? Social
Yes.
media has created this environment where we can't communicate, right? You go out, you see a young couple at dinner, they're both on their phones or something like
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So that kind of drives your point home of
Yeah.
it's almost more important for your work to be there as technology grows.
Well, it's, it's that, that basic understanding of human interaction is turning more and more into just an unfair advantage.
Hmm.
In the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king.
Right.
And so, you know, I do think that there's maybe a growing opportunity for me
Right.
out of this versus a diminishing opportunity.
I'm curious on, and this is, you may not have an answer to this. I'm curious your take on how many of, and I don't even know how we could even quantify this, but it's almost like how much different or how much better do you think the world would be if even half of the people knew some of the things you know about communication? Because I can see this applying to so much relationships,
Yeah.
politics. I mean, everything comes into communication,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You're talking about impact. How
Yeah.
much impact do you think you could have with people learning these skills, even a base level of these
Yeah.
skills?
Well, Jet, fundamentally underneath it all, my commitment is to a world that works for everyone and everything. And I think the most direct route to actually accomplishing that is to being willing to solve anything and everything in communication, which I think is absolutely possible, right? Wars, that's a breakdown of communication, right? And that's people not being willing to just go another level deeper and another level deeper in communication. And so, that's my fundamental play, is a world that works for everyone and everything, and I think that's achievable through what I teach.
Yeah, that's incredible. That's incredible. Well, I want to jump over to some of these rapid fire questions we have here as we wrap up.
Okay.
Let you drop some truth bombs or some heavy hitters on the listeners. So first one here. What's one tool or resource that's been a game changer for you and your business? Maybe something that's helped you coach or scale.
A tool,
Or resource.
a resource. Okay, so I'm just going to go big here. And if people, if you respect what I've said so far and you're willing to listen to me, there's this thing I did for the first time back in about 2001 called the Landmark Forum. And it is the most powerful granddaddy personal growth and development course on earth. And they're not perfect. It's not a cult. You If you go in and you are really open to personal growth and development, there's just not a better, more powerful thing on earth, right? And some people say, oh, well, they're very cerebral. They don't have enough heart. They're, whatever. Like, okay, listen, whatever. Go do it. And then follow the thing that you find next that has more heart or has more whatever or whatever. But this is such an absolute, enormously powerful, fundamental place to start. Go do the Landmark Forum.
Landmark Forum. Okay. That's good. Number two here. What's the best advice you've ever gotten about growing a business that stuck with you?
Um, so I think that probably the best, like what immediately pops to mind is the first time that I raised like over $1 million. And as they handed us the check at bigwords.com, I was one of 4 co-founders. We ultimately raised over $80 million and then we went out of business in the dot-com crash. But as they handed us that first check, they said, okay, boys, because it was 4 of us that were boys. They said, okay, boys, remember this. B people hire C people because they're afraid of looking bad. A people hire A plus people because they want to get the job done right and they're not afraid of learning something. Be A people.
That's deep.
Dude, that is boom pow, right? Because if you are the boss of a company and every single person at that company is smarter than you are winning massively.
Absolutely. That's incredible advice. All right, last one. This is your chance to kind of leave your mark on the listeners. For founders just starting out, what's one piece of advice you'd give to help them communicate their vision and win their first big win in business?
Okay, so to communicate is to win in my book. So the fundamental failure I think most often that I see is the failure to make an emotional connection, because we see how other people do it and we think that's how we're supposed to do it. Well, look, if everybody jumped off the 5th floor, window and like went splat, I hope you wouldn't jump too, right? Just because everybody else is doing it wrong doesn't mean you should.
Mhm.
So fundamentally, creating what I call an origin story that explains to people why you care so much about what you're doing and where that came from and how you identified the problem you're solving and why that wrapped in so much to your core. And when you can share that with people in a way that's really, really powerful, everything you say after that gets heard differently because you have established with that origin story, not your credibility. That's probably already established if you got the meeting to raise the funds or whatever. The most important thing in those early moments, I think, is not your credibility, but establishing what I call your emotional credibility. Why are you the person I can trust to run this thing or to take this on or to take my investment and make the most of it or to do this important piece or this function for my company? So I sub this out to you or whatever it is, right? But
Mhm.
when you tell that story about who you are and why you care, you establish your emotional credibility, which just changes everything.
That's incredible. We'll leave that as the last thing for listeners to have on here. John, it's been
Can I give you one more thing? Very short.
absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely.
So when people say do what you love, they're right, but they don't finish out the sentence well enough. Here's how it really goes, I think. Do what you love because that's the only thing that you're probably going to be able to do long enough to succeed. Because here's the thing, it's easy to be an overnight success when you've been doing something for 10 years. Do what
We're
you
gonna
love.
let that one sit. That'll be the finisher here. John, it's been
Okay.
great having you on here. That wraps up another inspiring episode of Founders Future, and I want to thank John for sharing his incredible journey and insights with us. Everything from building executive speaking success to coaching leaders at NASA and Google to communicate with impact. To our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe to Founders Future wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find more resources and insights at closers.io, where we're dedicated to helping businesses accelerate their sales and marketing efforts through world class sales systems and playbooks. Until then, keep climbing, and we'll see you on the next one.